It's a bigger cabinet, 30 strong, with more women and many more young ministers replacing veterans in key portfolios. Is this a shakeup that can revitalize the government's agenda and poll numbers? Let's ask Martin Regcon, Queen's Park columnist with the Toronto Star, and Alison Jones, Queen's Park reporter with Canadian Press. Good to see you too. This is a bit of an historic day at Queen's Park. So, Martin, start us off. The overarching theme you would find in this shuffle is what?
Well, the government wants to cast this as a reboot, a rejuvenation, but we can't think of this as a one-day wonder on TVO tonight or in the Toronto Star tomorrow. It's about where does this position them 2 years from now, because this is all about winning. It's about recasting, it's about rebranding, but it's about trying to find the right balance of gender, geography, ethnicity as well, and just finding out how do they win and how do they avoid the problem, the trouble spot politicians, get them out of the line of fire and bring in people who are more reliable.
On that list of criteria, I did not hear merit and/or competence. Was that, are you suggesting, not part of the equation?
I think it has to be in terms of avoiding accidents, political accidents, and I don't think it's the preeminent part of deciding who gets into cabinet. One hopes they are all reasonably competent, but there are so many other factors that go into the mix.
Okay. Alison, what did you see this morning from the shuffle?
I think the two biggest promotions, two of the biggest surprises were Mitzi Hunter to education. She previously was Associate Minister for Finance, so she had the responsibility for bringing in the ORPP. I guess Wynne would argue she's done a good job with that, and hence this big promotion. Glenn Thibeault moves from the backbenches to energy. So those are sort of the two big winners, I would say. And Tracy McCharles was really the main, if only, demotion that I saw. She was removed as Minister of Children and Youth Services, and she keeps Minister responsible for women's issues, gets another minister responsible for a portfolio, but loses that main cabinet portfolio.
Consistent with you don't know the players with a program when you go to a baseball game, let's just go through some of the highlights right now. Sheldon, let's bring up this graphic. There are, I guess the big news was 7 new ministers in this government, 7 rookie ministers off the backbench. 5 women, 2 men. There are now actually, if you count it up, more MPPs in the Liberal government sitting in cabinet than in the backbench. That's a bit unusual. And nobody was forced out of cabinet. Everybody who was in before is still in, save and except, of course, for the 4 who resigned of their own volition this past week. And again, following up on what Alison had to say, here's some of the highlights when it comes to names you might be seeing more of in the future. Glenn Thibeault, remember, got elected in that very controversial by-election in Sudbury. He's the new Minister of Energy, a very tough portfolio. Liz Sandals, no longer the Education Minister. Now the President of the Treasury Board will be counting the government's pennies as they spend them over the next couple of years. Yasser Naqvi, 20 years ago, started law school. Today he's the Attorney General of the province of Ontario. A few high-profile people didn't move, including Eric Hoskins as Minister of Health, Charles Sousa in Finance, Glenn Murray in Environment. Mitzi Hunter, as you just pointed out, Alison, is the new Minister of Education, responsible for spending $22 billion of education dollars. A couple of rookies we should pay attention to. Eleanor McMahon, plucked off the backbenches, now Minister of Tourism, Culture and Sport, and Indira Naidoo-Harris, who was a backbencher before, now gets that responsibility for the Ontario Retirement Pension Plan. 7 new rookie MPPs into cabinet, that's a lot in one fell swoop. Again, what's being said here?
It is a lot. Kathleen Wynne always has tried to not bring in rookies straight from election day. She believes they need to be seasoned and tested a little bit. A big push of this was trying to get closer to gender parity. There was a bit of a misapprehension that she was looking for 50-50. That wasn't really possible. Justin Trudeau was able to do it. He had a much bigger pool of MPs to choose from in Ottawa, and he was starting from scratch. Kathleen Wynne inherited much of the old Liberal team.
From McGuinty.
From McGuinty. I think with a couple of those new ministers, geography and gender really are paramount. They are in swing ridings, and those are important to the Liberals come in the next election. I think the biggest single surprise for trivia buffs and political nerds, as you often describe us, is the rival. I have to look at my program actually to find his name, but Chris Ballard, a white guy from Newmarket, is in cabinet. And you ask yourself, why? Has he distinguished himself? I don't want to pick on him and say that he hasn't, but I think he's in a tough riding. He won it he snatched it from the Tories, from Frank Cleese. And so that's what goes into shaping it. Glenn Thibeault, The new Democrat who didn't cross the floor, switched, resigned, and changed houses from Ottawa to Queen's Park, I think comes in with a pretty strong CV, interesting background before politics and in politics, former journalist made good. And so he's one who I think is going to be one to watch.
Laura Albanese, another former journalist,
Yes,
made good.
correct.
As an anchor on Omni. She's now in for the first time as
And
well.
let's not forget the other anchor who made it, Indira
Naidu-Harris actually used to work here.
There's a future for television anchors in politics.
Maybe. I want to talk to you about autism, because in your previous answer you pointed out Tracy McCharles, who was the minister responsible for that, is no longer. She took a thrashing in the House almost on a daily basis from the opposition on the autism file. Michael Coteau represents a riding just a couple, actually right beside Kathleen Wynne's, Don Valley East. He's now the minister in charge of this, Children's and Youth Services. What's he got waiting for him?
He's got quite a file waiting for him. And as you said, this is an ongoing controversy for the government. The parents who are upset by the government's decision to stop funding IBI, the intensive therapy for children 5 and older, these parents have been relentless in their protests. They've come to Queen's Park to protest, I think 4 different times. They hold protests at individual MPPs' offices. Their social media campaign is just relentless again, and they've been after not just the minister, but all of their individual MPPs. And so I think they might take this as a sign that the government is willing to maybe shift course a little bit. The Premier has signaled that she's sort of left the door open a tiny bit to change the transition plan. It might mean giving parents a little bit more money to help them transition to this new program. They've been given $8,000 for kids who were removed from the list.
But you're operating under the assumption that there is a potential good news announcement for Michael Coteau early in his term.
There could be. It wouldn't be a total surprise. The Premier has signaled a willingness to, like I say, leave the door open just a crack, not change this program entirely. That seems pretty set, but certainly this is a big signal with a new face in that role.
I thought she liked him. This is no, it's very, I'm being sort of facetious, but the reality is she's handed one of the most fractious portfolios, most difficult, the one that has got them in a whole heap of trouble, to a guy that she has always liked and been a big fan of, Michael Coteau. Why do that?
She has. Well, he's sort of a soft-spoken guy. He can maybe help smooth out this file a little bit. But what Tracy McCharles, I thought, did well in this file was she always seemed very contrite. Almost is the word. She never got her back up and was defensive when all this criticism came at her. She talked about how she's raising a special needs child too. She even broke down into tears one day in the legislature. And so I think if Coteau follows her lead there and doesn't get defensive in response to all this criticism, as we actually sort of saw him get a little bit defensive when responding to the Auditor General's report on the Pan Am Games the other day, I think he would probably do well to take a little bit of that defensiveness away.
Sometimes they change the name of ministries and it means nothing. Other times it means a lot. And I'm thinking probably the new Minister for Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. That's a name change that my hunch is means a lot. What do you see?
Well, remember the Premier used to hold this portfolio before she became Premier, and I think after, perhaps briefly, she held agriculture. But in David Zimmer, who did not move, she, I think, finds someone that she can trust and that Indigenous people find to be a worthy interlocutor. So I think they have already signaled with the reconciliation session that we saw in the legislature in the last couple of weeks that they're serious about that. Other name changes, of course, Deb Matthews has gone over to, her name hasn't changed, but her ministry that she has inherited, which used to be, we would always say TCU because training colleges and universities is a mouthful. You could call it PSE. Now they're calling it.
It's advanced education.
Yes, and training.
And skills development.
And skills
It's still
development.
a mouthful, but it's a different mouthful.
But it's a more coherent or more integrated, more holistic approach. I think they wanted to repurpose Deb Matthews in the sense that she was underutilized. She's one of the best communicators in cabinet. She has the empathy thing. I used to call her the Minister of Empathy. And she is very seasoned, has good political judgment, a former party president. And so she was at Treasury Board, which is extremely important. It's pivotal, but low profile. And she was deputy premier, so she would pinch hit when Wynne was away. Now she has a higher profile ministry. You mentioned Yasser Naqvi, you gave him a shout out earlier, and the interesting thing about that portfolio is that he is Attorney General, which is ostensibly the least political position in cabinet. You're meant to be above the fray and clean hands when you're making sometimes sensitive decisions. But he's also House Leader, which is the most partisan, in a way, job. So that's going to be an interesting challenge to see if he can balance those two.
I've heard it described as there are inside and outside jobs for cabinet ministers. Deb Matthews used to have one of the most inside jobs as president of Treasury Board, so she wasn't out there cutting ribbons, and I know that used to drive her crazy. She's now got an outside job where she can cut ribbons and meet people and do stuff. She's going to like this a lot more, isn't she?
Yes, it's a very outside gig, as you put it. The Premier has talked a lot about the knowledge economy, and she's put a lot of time and effort and money into skills development, as we've seen in the revamp of the student grants. She spends a lot of time making announcements in Waterloo, talking about the sort of intelligence and tech corridor there. So I think that will fit right into Deb Matthews' wheelhouse very well.
There's always a temptation on a day like today to spend all the time talking about who's up, who's down, who's new with all this. I want to spend just a couple of minutes here talking about a guy who's not in cabinet anymore and who sat in the front row today cheering and clapping every time one of the new ministers was sworn in. And this is a guy who's been in cabinet for every minute that he sat on the government benches. I'm talking about Jim Bradley, of course, the MPP for St. Catharines, who last week celebrated his 39th anniversary of his first election win, June 9th, 1977. What a class act for him to show up today, eh?
Yeah, and I think most people who know Jim Bradley and his constituents know that he lives and breathes politics. So for him, this would have been a difficult decision to leave cabinet. He is not one of those who you imagine resigning or retiring, I should say, from politics anytime soon. But he was chair of cabinet until recently, until today, and he brought a kind of political savvy to that table, a political antenna, and also a kind of left of center approach that, and you know, when the swearing in today, they mentioned, they incited or reminded the new ministers, that they should speak their mind inside. Not every minister does that around the table for reasons of self-preservation. Remember,
he sure did.
He did, and because ministers are always mindful that they serve at pleasure of the crown, or in this case, the premier. And so he has never hesitated to speak out, whether in caucus or in cabinet.
I did notice Kathleen Wynne actually walked up to him after the ceremony was over and shook his hand and said, thank you for being there and for being, so classy about the whole thing. Because I guess he got his first cabinet job in 1985. He's been there a long time. That's impressive.
He has, yeah. I don't think we've seen the last of Jim Bradley, though. I expect him to be just as vocal as ever when the House returns.
Because he does like to heckle.
He
will be doing that.
Bit,
he will be doing some of that. Martin, we got about a minute left here. For those of us who watch these things perhaps too carefully, because we're what was the expression you used?
It's yours. We're political nerds.
Political nerds,
yes.
Right. In terms of the grand population of Ontario, how much do they care about this? How carefully do they watch any of this? I know it's the government's effort to put a new coat of paint on things, but does anybody outside the precinct notice?
It depends where. It's geography again. In Northern Ontario and some parts of Ontario, people really do pay attention to who is the local representative, the voice in cabinet. In the city of Toronto, far less. Look, they are not household names, most of them. They are almost no names, to sort of paraphrase Pierre Trudeau. But remember, too, that some of the most important portfolios haven't changed. So Charles Sousa, who is better known, he delivers the budget, is still there. Glenn Murray is still there at Environment, for better or for worse. And as Dr. Hoskins, Eric Hoskins, will remain at Health, to the consternation of many doctors. So what does it all mean at the end of the day? A bloated cabinet has become bigger. Is it better? We'll know in 2 years.
We shall see, which is often the answer to all of the questions I ask on this program. Alison Jones from CP, Martin Regcon from the Toronto Star, good of you to join us tonight here on TVO.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.